Close your eyes for a moment and imagine a world where beauty was a dangerous language spoken in whispers and poisons. A world where looking healthy was a social embarrassment and having a tan meant you were poor. Where the most coveted complexion came from a powder made of lead, and the most fashionable forehead required removing your eyebrows forever. This was the medieval pursuit of beauty, and it was anything but simple. What if everything you thought you knew about beauty was backwards? What if the secret to being attractive involved slowly poisoning yourself? What if the most desirable women were the ones who looked like they might faint at any moment? Tonight, we journey back to a time when beauty was not about health, but about status. When pale skin was a flex, and every noblewoman was engaged in a silent chemical war against her own reflection. The medieval beauty routine was brutal. It was toxic, and it was absolutely fascinating. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to The Calm Historian and hit that like button if you are ready to explore the strange and often deadly world of historical beauty. Join our community of history lovers who find peace in the past. Now dim the lights and let us step back into a world where beauty was a dangerous art and the price of perfection was sometimes your life. Close your eyes and imagine a world where the sun was your enemy and a healthy glow was a mark of shame. In medieval Europe, the ideal of beauty was not about health or vitality, but about a fragile and ethereal paleness that whispered of nobility and privilege. A tan was not a sign of a relaxing holiday, but a brutal advertisement that you worked in the fields under the harsh sun. It meant you were poor. It meant you were common. And in a society obsessed with status, that was the ultimate social failure. The pale ideal was a carefully constructed lie. It said, I am so wealthy, I never need to step outside. I am so refined that I am almost translucent. I am so important that my very skin is a canvas for my class. But nature rarely cooperates with such demands. And so medieval women, and even some men, turned to a desperate and dangerous solution. They began a silent war against their own bodies. A war fought with powders and paints that promised perfection but delivered poison. The quest for that luminous corpse-like complexion was not just a beauty routine. It was a declaration of power. A willingness to sacrifice health for the ultimate social flex. But as they painted their faces with mixtures that would later be known as deadly, they also began to lose something else. A part of their identity. A part that was visible to everyone. And that part was their eyebrows. For in the pursuit of a vast and uninterrupted forehead, the medieval beauty seeker was about to commit an act of cosmetic warfare that would leave them forever changed. The vanishing brow was not a mere fashion whim. It was a statement of absolute refinement. You see, the medieval ideal of beauty demanded a forehead so smooth and so vast that it resembled a blank canvas. A canvas upon which the artist of nobility could paint their superiority. And eyebrows, those stubborn little hedges of hair, were the first to go. They were plucked and shaved and eradicated with a dedication that bordered on obsession. The goal was to achieve a look that was serene and almost otherworldly. A look that suggested a mind so elevated it had no time for such mundane concerns as facial hair. But the methods were where the true story of sacrifice unfolds. Women did not simply tweeze a few stray hairs. They employed hot cloths and pastes made from quicklime and vinegar. They used tweezers made of metal that pulled each hair from the root. And for those who truly suffered, there were depilatory creams made from arsenic. Yes, arsenic. The very substance that would later be known as a poison was a beauty tool. The price was a burning sensation and the risk of permanent scarring. But the reward was a forehead that could host a jousting tournament. A forehead that said, I am too refined to be bothered by such trivial things as eyebrows. And if a woman could not endure the pain, she could always fake it. She could draw her new hairline slightly higher with a bit of soot and cover the rest with a headband. A medieval form of contouring that used fabric instead of a brush. But even as they erased their brows, they were still painting their faces. And the next step in their beauty ritual was about to introduce a whole new kind of danger. For the rouge that brought color to their cheeks came from a source that was even more deadly than the lead on their skin. The rouge that brought life to their cheeks came from a source that was even more deadly than the lead on their skin. A touch of color was considered desirable, but it had to be subtle. A gentle flush like a maiden caught in a moment of modesty. To achieve this, the medieval woman turned to a pigment made from cinnabar, a mineral that was almost pure mercury. She would dab this poisonous red onto her cheeks with her fingers or a cloth. The result was a rosy glow that suggested youth and vitality. But the price was paid in a slow accumulation of mercury in her body. It caused tremors and memory loss and eventually madness. Some women used rouge made from red lead, which was also highly toxic. Others crushed insects like the cochineal to create a deep red dye. The logic was always the same. Better to die young with a fashionable pink cheek than to live a long, healthy life with a natural skin tone. The church and society were deeply suspicious of this painted look. Vanity was a sin, and applying rouge was seen as deceptive. A woman who wore makeup was considered to be hiding something. Perhaps her true age or her true character. She might even be accused of being a temptress or a witch. The goal was always modest enhancement, not theatrical statement. And if someone complimented you on your glow, you were expected to deny everything and mutter something about the wind. But the ritual of beauty was not complete without addressing the hair. For even as they poisoned their skin and erased their brows, the medieval woman was about to undertake a laborious and often foul-smelling process to achieve the perfect shade of blonde. The ritual of beauty was not complete without addressing the hair. For even as they poisoned their skin and erased their brows, the medieval woman was about to undertake a laborious and often foul-smelling process to achieve the perfect shade of blonde. Blonde hair was the gold standard of medieval beauty. It was associated with youth and purity and virtue. The Virgin Mary was almost always painted with golden locks, even though historically she was certainly not blonde. To be born with light hair was considered a divine blessing. But nature is fickle, and most women were not so fortunate. So they turned to homemade concoctions that were equal parts science and desperation. They mixed saffron and honey with ash and lye. They applied this mixture to their hair and then sat in the sun for hours. A process called sunbasking. Some recipes called for the use of urine, which was thought to help lift the color. The logic was questionable, but the commitment was absolute. The result was often a brittle straw-like texture and a scalp that burned. But the goal was always a celestial shimmer. A mane of hair that looked like it had been kissed by holy light. This was not just about vanity. It was about signaling your status and your virtue. A golden-haired woman was seen as closer to God. But once a woman married, her hair was immediately banished from public view. It was covered with veils and nets and wimples. The message was clear. Your beauty is now the property of your husband, and you must hide it from the world. But the most elaborate part of the medieval beauty routine was just beginning. For now, the noblewoman would turn to the tools of the trade. And the next step in her ritual would require a substance so toxic it would ultimately become her undoing. The most elaborate part of the medieval beauty routine was just beginning. For now, the noblewoman would turn to the tools of the trade, and the next step in her ritual would require a substance so toxic it would ultimately become her undoing. White lead powder was the foundation of medieval beauty. It was the secret behind that luminous porcelain complexion that every noblewoman craved. To create it, alchemists would combine lead with vinegar. The metal would corrode into a white crust, which was then ground into a fine powder. The result was a smooth, matte finish that covered blemishes and created an illusion of perfection. But the illusion came at a terrible cost. Lead is a neurotoxin, and when applied daily, it was slowly absorbed into the skin and the bloodstream. The symptoms were insidious: hair loss and fatigue, skin ulcers and tremors, and eventually a creeping madness that would claim the mind before it claimed the body. But the medieval woman did not see this as a drawback. She saw it as evidence that the product was working. If her skin began to flake and blister, it meant she was using the right ingredients. If she began to feel weak and unwell, it was a sign of her dedication to beauty. The logic was twisted, but it was also consistent. Beauty required sacrifice. And the greater the sacrifice, the greater the beauty. She would apply this powder with a damp cloth or a piece of felt. She would smooth it over her face and neck, and sometimes even her chest. The goal was to erase any trace of color or imperfection, to become a living canvas of pale perfection. But this ritual was not just about her face. It was also about her body. And as she painted herself with lead, she was also preparing to restrict her form in ways that would leave her breathless. As she painted herself with lead, she was also preparing to restrict her form in ways that would leave her breathless. The ideal medieval body was not athletic or strong. It was soft and fragile and almost ethereal. A narrow waist was essential. To achieve it, women would lace themselves into tight-fitting garments that cinched their midsections. They would wear layers of linen and wool that compressed their ribs and made it difficult to breathe. The result was a swaying, delicate posture that suggested a life of leisure. A life where manual labor was a distant memory. But the restriction went beyond clothing. The ideal woman was also expected to be demure and quiet. She was not to laugh too loudly or smile too wide. A smile was a risky endeavor in an age of bad teeth. And so she learned to express herself with a glance. A subtle tilt of the head. The church and society reinforced these expectations. A woman's beauty was seen as a reflection of her virtue. If she was beautiful, she was blessed. But if she used her beauty to attract attention, she was suspected of vanity and sin. The pressure was immense. Be attractive, but do not try. Be desirable, but do not seduce. Be virtuous, but do not be plain. It was an impossible balancing act. And the consequences of failure were severe. A woman who was too bold could be accused of being a witch or a temptress. A woman who was too plain was seen as cursed or morally deficient. But even as they endured this pressure, the noble women of the Middle Ages were about to take their beauty routine to a new height. A literal height that would elevate them above the common crowd. And this final accessory would be their most dangerous yet.